of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, the show where we talk about all the crazy stupid stuff people do in marketing and how you cannot do that, but instead make smart, authentic decisions that create marketing programs that will actually work for you. Because it's not quite as simple as just choosing a tactic and following someone else's way of making it work. There is a you factor that comes to play when we are going to make a marketing program work for you or for the company that you represent. And I'm really excited for this topic today because we're doing something a little different than we normally do, and we're talking about a tactic. So normally on this show, we talk a little bit more foundational about marketing, and tactics are the things that you layer on top of your foundation and your strategy. But at the end of the day, the tactic is the thing that brings your message to the world. So we don't have a full marketing program if we don't have a tactic. And what we're going to be looking at today, we're going to use podcasting as an example today. A lot of people consider this a podcast. I consider it a LinkedIn live show because it is not on the radio and it is not on any podcasting platforms. People have their own definition of things. We're going to talk about that. But also we're going to talk about what are some of the things we need to look at from a strategy and from a foundational perspective to make a specific tactic work. So we're using podcasting as an example for that today, but we also have a really phenomenal guest joining us who knows much more about podcasting and radio shows than I do. So if you have any questions or experiences or queries that you would like to propose as part of the conversation, please do, because Sam is the guy who will be able to help us navigate those things. So before we jump too deep into the conversation, Sam, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us how you ended up being all about the voice mechanism?
Well, people often ask me, how did I get into this? Do I have a background in broadcasting? Do I have a degree in mass communication? It's like, no. It's a very New York story. I just met a guy at a party and I thought I would help him sell his business. Instead, I ended up buying it. And it's been really kind of learn on the job type of experience for the last 14 plus years. However, I was on the speech and debate team in college. I did really well and I loved it. And I joined Toastmasters afterwards. So even though I got my degree in computer science and I was always kind of working with technology, I loved public speaking. I've spoken at everything from Star Trek conventions to transformational development events. And I even had my own, I had a TEDx talk back in 2016 at TEDx Upper West Side. So I guess I just love the gift of gab. Being Jewish people love to tell stories. So I'm just a natural born storyteller.
This is why Sam and I are friends, because we put the storytellers in a room and we can entertain each other all day.
Absolutely.
This is so great. So Sam, maybe let's start off this conversation with the concept of the kind of like technical components required in having a podcast and the distribution and things like that. How often do you find people get caught up in the technical details of things instead of focusing on the gift of gab or the actual story that people want to tell? And is that bad or is that fine? Can it be redirected?
Yeah, well, first, I really want to honor you for saying that, your show isn't really a podcast, even though some people call it a podcast, because the term is used so loosely today. And there's so many things people refer to as a podcast that really aren't a podcast, because a podcast is something very specific. A podcast is a recorded audio file that is uploaded to a quote unquote podcast platform like Apple Podcasts, Google's, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, they all do podcasting, and then is pushed out via what's called an RSS feed, technical term. And so you kind of can listen to it whenever you want. That's a podcast. Now, what I do is more than just that, because at talkradio.nyc, we're actually an internet radio station. So we do our shows live, we stream them out, both audio and video out live, but then we record it while it's live, and then we put out the recording afterwards as a podcast. And I think what happens is when people really just starting off, and they don't want to invest a lot of money in it, they end up doing everything themselves. And if you're not a technical person like myself, it can be overwhelming. It can take a long time to get into the editing and how do I get the music in there and my guest's voice and everything. And it really can take a lot more time than is necessary. And those who either have the resources or just smart enough to know that their time is better spent on their genius, which is their content, right? I mean, if you're doing a show, you're doing a show on the things that you really are passionate about and very knowledgeable about. You focus on that, and then you give the production and you give the distribution, all that other stuff over to either a producer or an organization like Talk Radio, and let them handle all the technical stuff, so you don't even have to worry about it. You just kind of show up, you do your genius, and then you go about your day and you let them worry about it, right? And it's like, are we going to design our own, print advertising or online advertising, or figure out our own pay-per-click campaign, or like all these 1,000,001 ways of getting the message out there? No, we don't know the best way to do all that stuff. So I often, when I do a presentation, I talk about the difference between the DIY, the do-it-yourself, versus DFY, done for you. And I just kind of feel like too many people are caught up in the DIY aspect of things just because they have the time and they can, and they don't realize that they're actually shooting themselves in the foot. And if they actually go for a done for you solution, it'll actually serve them much better, and that will give them the ability to stick to it longer.
Okay, so I love that this is where we're going with this, because I feel like, and I would love to hear your perspective on this, Sam, and I would love to hear the perspective from the audience if you are joining us live as well, is usually we don't have a good reason to do a thing. We don't have a good reason to give it a budget, and therefore we tend to do things ourselves, DIY, because I haven't created that like value alignment in my brain, right? If I know that the value of this activity is X and you're going to charge me X, then like, hey, I'm going to just get you to do this because like that makes sense to me. But if there's a lot of maybe external factors, or maybe what we talk about a lot on the show is the internet is telling you to be on TikTok, right? Then we may not have that investment mindset yet. So is that something that you see? And if so, where do you see that transition happen where people actually start being ready to have something done for them?
It's a great question, Tracy. And I really want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to your audience, because there are way too many people out there who are doing a podcast as a vanity project. Like they're just doing it because they love to talk, and they think if they get 1 million listeners, they're going to be super successful. And then that doesn't happen. And then they quit in 3 weeks. And the thing is like, you should be doing it that's in support of something else that you're doing. In other words, you have a brand, you have a business, you have a program, you have something that you sell to people, right? That generates income for you. And then it's, okay, well, how can I use a podcast to support either getting more people, getting the word out there, or creating better content for, serving my audience, serving the people. And when you come at it from that aspect, now all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, if I do well at the podcast and I'm a professional at it, and I'm integrated into all my other marketing stuff, and it's part of my newsletter and it's part of my outreach, and I put it on my email signature so everybody knows that I'm a host, now there's more value to it. Now people come to it who could be your primary target audience, who are the most likely buyers. And now your sales start to increase because of the branding work you've done around the podcast. And now it supports the whole business. And then then comes sort of the unexpected sort of benefits that really raise you up. Like when I did my TEDx talk, I think I was the only speaker at that event who didn't have a speaker's reel, because I hadn't done much public speaking. It was about 6 years after I took over the station, so I hadn't done much public speaking around that time. And you know, when my friend connected me to the organizer, and he's like, "Well, send me your speaker's reel," and I go, "Well, I don't really have a speaker's reel, but I could send you, you know, a few of my interviews that I've done and how I did my interviews." And he said, "Okay, great. Yeah, send me a handful of those." So I sent him 5 of like my best episodes. He watched them, he listened to them. He's like, "Wow, these were great. It was wonderful. We'd love to have you as a featured speaker." And so it got me in there, and that was totally unexpected. And I had, you know, ever since I'd learned about TED, I've always wanted to do some kind of a TED talk. And so just to have that opportunity was totally unexpected, but came from the fact that I had been doing my show for already about 6 years. So I had a lot of content that I could pull from. I had honed my skill as an interviewer and shown that, like, hey, I am a good speaker. And so that really helped. And little things, it's not such a little thing, but things like that can happen over time when you're really committed to it. So it's really understanding that there's direct value, like helping you to sell a program or a product, or you know, getting more clients on board, or even just saving you time. If you know, there's certain good strategies where a podcast can be an investment of time that pays itself back over many times over after the fact, if you're intelligent about how you do it. So I mean, it's when you realize that, and you don't always see all of this because you don't have the strategies, you haven't been around it all the time. So that's why working with a professional who has the experience, who's seeing all kinds of crazy things, can say, "Oh, look, I think it would be good if you did this and this and this and that with your podcast, and that'll really support building your brand and your business."
Mm-hmm. So, Sam, what would you say is there like a good profile of person or business type or industry that is highly compatible with podcasting, or is there a different kind of decision factor we should be looking at?
You know, I've seen so many different podcasts on all kinds of different topics. It's really sort of hard to limit it, because it's not really about what you do or what you sell. It's about how good a storyteller you are. It's about, can you have fun in front of the microphone? It's about, you know, do you want to connect with all these different people and really serve your audience, provide value to your audience? However, having said that, there are certain types of people that podcasts are amazing for, and I like to call them knowledgepreneurs. People who make a living off of what's in between their ears, their gray matter, their knowledge, their experience. People who make money from their experience, they make great hosts.
So what have you found, like, is what are some of the character traits that those type of people have that maybe people in our audience might be able to self-identify with or not?
Well, not always, but usually they love to talk. They have a servant leader mindset. They're looking to serve their audience. They're more concerned about their audience. I mean, sometimes it helps to have a little bit of an ego, because, you know, you like to be a little bit of attention, but too much ego and it ruins the whole thing. But I find when you're more coming from a place of service, you create a much, much better show. And just people who like to learn all the time, who like different things. You know, when you could bring on all different kinds of guests on your show. I mean, to me, you know, I've been doing my own show for over 14 years now. I still learn something new each and every week because of my guests.
This is why I like to have guests on my show as well. Also because I feel like part of my whole jam is to grow. And if I can get people's different perspectives, then I get to grow while we are in conversation and everybody wins.
And you can create great partnerships too. It's a great kind of way to interview somebody who might be a good strategic partner for you, like we could be, and you kind of get a good sense of them from having them on your show, and you get to ask them all kinds of questions. And so then afterwards you follow up and it's like, hey, that went really well. I think maybe we should try and work together. Or maybe it didn't go so well, or maybe something came out during the interview that you were like, no, we got to keep that far away from me, that one far away from me. And so then it's like, you help to sort through and sift through potential strategic partners very easily. So that there are lots of ways you can use your show. Yeah.
Well, okay, so this is an interesting perspective, Sam, that I think maybe people haven't thought about, is that there's opportunities to do some testing along the way. And I would say, because we do have this split with like the recording and the publishing, that it's possible that you can record an episode and be like, yeah, no, that doesn't like match my vibe or my brand or what have you, and I'm like not going to publish that one. So how have you seen some of your clients really embrace that from a testing and learning perspective?
Yeah, I have one host on my network who loves to bring on people as co-hosts, like not just guests, but they co-host the show and then they have a guest. And so he tries it with all different people, and some people make great co-hosts. And so then he keeps them on, has them come back several times over. But he had one experience with this gentleman who seemed very in alignment. They both had a similar condition that they would talk about on the show. And the guy was awful. I mean, the guy was just all about himself. He didn't do any work. He didn't really give value to the audience. And so he was like, nah, this ain't working. And he was really kind to the guy. He even brought him back a second time just to see if he'd be better. And he wasn't. It's like, no. And he even asked my opinion. And I was like, no, get rid of him. Don't have him back on your show.
I think like this, again, one of the things I want people to take away from that example is that even if you try that, I think a lot of times, especially if you're doing like a live show, right? If you're doing a live show, then people might be like, oh my God, I had that guy on and it totally hurt my brand and blah, blah. But if you are recording for a podcast and you have an experience like that, you just don't have to post the episode.
Right. But even if you're doing it as a live stream, first of all, I mean, you finish out the show, but after the fact, you can delete the live stream off the platforms, and only the people who were actually there live heard it. So, and even when you do a live show, and I do live shows every single week, but still the vast majority of your audience is always the people who hear it after the fact, because more people can't make the time that you're doing your live show than can make it. But usually it's your most loyal fans, and your most loyal fans are also your most forgiving fans. So even if you're doing a live stream, it doesn't work after the fact, say, you know what, forget that episode, delete it off everything. We don't need that to go out there. And you can do that. So you're not damaging your brand too much.
Okay, I just want to dive into this. Your most loyal fans are your most forgiving fans. So can you tell us a little bit more about how that happens? Because I think a lot of times people are concerned about like how am I going to get people to come and listen to the show? And so what are some of the like targeting things that people should be considering in terms of finding those most loyal fans who can forgive us for tech issues or what have you?
So here's the thing. Your loyal fans are the ones who tune in week after week after week. And when you do a good job week after week after week, and then you have one day where you're just off, they know that, well, Tracy's been wonderful for the last 5 months, and okay, she had one bad day, that they'll be okay with that. They'll be like, okay, we'll see what happens next week. But if it's consistent, if it's like week after week after week, you have trouble, then like, nah, forget it. Like this person doesn't have their act together. So go ahead.
I just want to dive into this concept of trouble, because I think a lot of different shows attract a lot of different people, right? So this show attracts specific people. other marketing shows maybe attract other people, and that's cool. That's why there's space for so many of these different conversations. So how might I know? How might I know when I am quote unquote doing a good job, or when I am just showing up to do the thing?
Okay,
Or
so
is that very subjective? I feel like maybe to some degree it's subjective, but
it might be a bit, but your audience will tell you. So again, this goes back to what I said before about the servant leader mindset of when you're doing your episode, your shows to really serve your audience, they'll feel that and they will show up. And also keep in mind that we're not for everybody. Like our brand, when we're being ourselves, it's a sorting process where the people who really resonate with us show up and those who don't show up. And so the more we're authentic, the more we're ourselves, the more we're showing up and just being who we are, people are going to hear that in your voice and your mannerisms and your gesture and the language you use, and they're going to be like, yeah, that's my person, like they got me. And then they'll be like coming back week after week after week. And if you're not, that's okay. Like you said, there's plenty of fish in the ocean. There's no market that's like so tiny that you need to get everyone. So being yourself is the surest way to attract the right kinds of people. And when you attract them and you pay attention to like the comments in the live stream, things like that, people will tell you, oh yeah, this was great. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. So doing a live show, on occasion, your guest doesn't show up that week.
facts. For followers of this show, it's happened twice.
And that happens. And so you got to learn sometimes when you're doing a live show to think on your feet. And I started, and I'd like riff on some topic, right? My guest didn't show up. I just went off, did a show all by myself. And I had to do that several times over years. I've been doing my show over 14 years. And my audience would say in the comments, oh, I love these shows, Sam, when it's just you talking. And then I started to ask, I said, so I know this is just me today, no guest. Did you like it? Was it good? Did you enjoy it? And then in the comments, I'd see afterwards, oh, it was great. We loved it. Do more of these. And so because of the feedback from my audience, I said, okay, you know what? I think I'm going to take one show each month. So most of the time, 3 weeks out of the month or 4 weeks out of the month, I'm interviewing someone, but 1 week out of the month, I'll do what I call a me only show. So it's just me. And if I and my audience, and when they post something in the comment section, I read it, I shout them out, I answer their questions, I respond to their comments. And so it's just me and my audience. And people seem to really like it. Some of my most viewed, most listened to shows are shows where I'm just going off on a topic without a guest. Who would have thunk it?
Well, and this is one, I love the permission that you created there to have both of those things still exist. So this is kind of something that happened. It wasn't planned, but hey, there was some value generated there. So how can we incorporate that? When I started this show, it was a panel only show, and we would only do episodes with like multiple guests and talk about a topic and have multiple perspectives. And I was like, but I also really like the idea of like deep diving a specific topic with a specific area of expertise. But I don't want to completely trade it because I love having an AI conversation with someone whose background is sales, right? Like the diversity of thought there is something that this show is also about. So how can I incorporate both of those things? And it doesn't have to be like one or the other. And
right.
It's actually funny because in my time of guests not showing up, I have done one episode of me just riffing on the topic by myself. I did another episode where one of the guests was like, hey, do you want somebody to chat with? Because I could come on and we could chat. And I'm like, yeah. And we talked about the planned topic, but it's a different person with a different perspective on that topic. And so we actually ended up coming back to the original topic with the original guest. We had a time zone issue thing. But like all of that is possible, right? All of those
right.
options are available, and it doesn't have to be just one thing. I only ever do this.
Right.
Just like
You know,
variety.
and the other thing too is like things happen beyond your guests' control that keep them from showing up. Like I've had people who there was a big storm, the electricity went out, and they just had to conserve power because they didn't know when they were going to get their electric back. So, you know, you can't fault a person for acts of God. You know what I mean?
And
So
I will tell you, folks, if you haven't experienced it yet, being on live on your mobile device will
yeah,
suck the life out of the thing so
yeah,
fast. And if you have no way you're going to have to charge that later, people are going to opt out. So,
yeah.
fun facts.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, you just got to be prepared for whatever life throws your way. And sometimes, you know, having those unexpected things happen, first of all, it shows your audience you're real. You're not hiding from what life is bringing to you. You got to think on your feet, do something a little different. And sometimes that's where the magic comes in, is where there's space for something different to happen.
And that, like, that humanness component is so important because kind of harkening back to where we started the conversation about how there's all this tech piece of it and it can get overwhelming. The people are here to listen to your story, to your exploration, to your conversation, to something about you as a person has intrigued them. And so, yes, there's tech components, and the tech components are there to support the human interaction, not to replace the human interaction.
And you know, people used to ask me all the time, "Oh, do you edit mistakes out of your show? Do you catch all the ums and ahs?" And you know, I kind of struggled with it for a while. Like, should we really do that? We should make people sound better. Until one day I heard from a marketing person who said to me, you know, it's really good that you're not doing that. He goes, because, you know, these major Fortune 500 companies, they spend millions of dollars to create these video ads that look like they were made out of someone's garage. Like they're spending a lot of money to make something look or feel sort of authentic. And I thought, oh, and then I realized, you know, we'd see what our audience loves the fact that we do things in a way where it's real, it's authentic. If someone, you know, makes a faux pas, you know, you're going to hear it. So then they see the real person. And in these days with AI generated content and all this stuff, people are tired of fake salesy kind of things. They want like real person. They want to know like this is a real human being with human experiences who can understand my human experience.
So, going off of that, the my human experience piece, because we did talk about how it's, let's say, most beneficial to have a podcast if it's leading somewhere, if you have somewhere to take people. But what about the people who have like a passion project?
Mhm.
I mean, so early in my career, I had a blog called The All in Mom, which was all about like mindset stuff for moms.
Mhm.
And I did it while
Mhm.
I was on maternity leave because it was kind of like a journaling outlet for me and an opportunity to just like open the door to conversation with other moms that might have been doing the same thing. And I think maybe it like whistled through my brain once very quickly that if you have like an actual volume on your blog, then you can get ad revenue and things like that. But I wasn't doing it for that. I was doing it for myself primarily and
Mhm.
secondarily to other people who might be going through the same thing. So, from a podcasting perspective, is this something that you would recommend for those kind of passion type of projects? Or
It absolutely can be. There are some like really, and I can't think of them off the top of my head, but there are some really famous podcasts that just started off as passion projects, and they totally took the person who created it in a totally different direction.
right.
Um, and you can actually do some really interesting stuff with that. Like I remember when I first took over the station, I had a gentleman on who was a divorce lawyer doing a show about divorce, right? So it makes sense promoting his business. But actually, the reason why he did it is because he was going through his own divorce. And it was kind of like his therapy each week. And he would start off his show every week saying, you know, I've been a divorce lawyer for 30 years. I thought I knew everything about divorce. I didn't know anything until I started going through my own divorce.
Mm.
And then each week he'd bring people on to talk about different aspects of divorce because he wanted to know this for himself, like stuff with finances, stuff with real estate, stuff with, managing the kids and holidays and like all this different kinds of stuff. And it was really funny because then one day after about 2-3 years of him doing his show, he came to me, he said, Sam, I don't have anything else left to talk about. My divorce is final. Everything's separated. I feel good. I think it's time for me to end my show. And I said, Larry, I completely understand, because he was doing it to support himself through the process. And the audience loved it. I mean, he was the most popular show at the time, and he got some amazing guests, just very coincidentally. Like, he got the author of 50 Shades of Grey on his show when she was visiting from England before 50 Shades of Grey blew up into this big thing. And he learned about the book because he went to some event with a lot of divorced women, and they were all talking about this book, and he was like, oh, what's this book about? And they all kind of giggled and said, oh, we can't tell you. You have to just read it yourself. And so he picked up them, read it. He's like, wow. And so he contacted the author, and at the time, again, she wasn't a big deal yet, and so they arranged that next time she came to New York, she came into studio and they did a show together. And it's like, that's you can't plan that out. I mean, it was just, there's so many things like that can happen. It's just the magic of it.
Yeah. And so let's talk about like the ending of a podcast, because that one seemed to have like a very good, like, okay, I did this, did what it was supposed to do, and now it feels like it has naturally come to its end. I think a lot of times too, I've heard that people start a podcast and they do a few episodes and they're just kind of like, meh, and so they kind of just leave it.
Right.
So
well,
from
to me, that's a big pet peeve.
Yeah, I would say that too. Also, because there's lots of things you can do for free to test out your concepts before you go the distance.
Right. Because that's the big problem, is the majority of people, they only do a few episodes and they're like, I'm not getting any benefit, I'm going to stop. And I'm like, you're just wasted all the time you put into it, and you didn't stick around long enough to see any benefit from it. And it's like, it's being very short-sighted. And if you're going to begin an endeavor, I mean, Seth Godin talks about the long tail of marketing all the time. And it's in the longevity is where you get the biggest benefit. The hosts who have worked with me the longest have always had the best results. I mean, Tony Martignetti, he became the #1 nonprofit podcast because he worked with me for 10 years. He stuck with it. I mean, it didn't take him 10 years to become #1, but if he had stopped after a year or two, he never would have made it to #1. He wouldn't have really become a thought leader in the nonprofit space.
Right.
So it's really like you're shooting yourself in the foot if you start it without truly making a commitment to it.
Yeah. And so you would say that a podcasting strategy is a long game, not a immediate gratification game.
Absolutely. I mean, same thing like you experience writing a blog. You don't get 1 million blog followers overnight or in a month. It takes time to build it up. But you see, here's the thing. When you feel like your show has come to the end, right, and you don't have anything more to say, that's fine, because you have all the recordings. You could take and repurpose that stuff for years after the fact. I mean, if it's not a current events kind of thing, but you have the recordings, you have this created material. And I'm sure the expression content is king. But once you have the content, you can turn it into all kinds of stuff. You can make a course out of it. You can make a book out of it. You can make white papers out of it. You can create all kinds of like marketing lead generation things out of it. So it's never wasted as long as you take it and do something with it. Most people don't. And so then it is a waste. But as long as you have this mindset of, okay, I've put this effort, I've put this time into it, I'm going to get as much out of this as I can. You can be really creative about what you can do with your show after the fact, even after you stop doing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sam, let's talk about how to get people to watch a show or listen to a show. Because I would also guess that there's a lot of people who create. I mean, like, this is kind of a content rule in general. There's a lot of content that gets created that does not get consumed and specifically does not get consumed for the purposes for which it was created. And
Right.
so, are there any tips that you have on or things we need to think about in terms of how do we create some traction or how do we create some direction to get people to go listen?
So the first thing I would say is to know your niche. Like very narrowly define your niche so that you know and you can make easy decisions about what kind of language to use, where do these people hang out, how to find them. Define it very narrowly in the beginning. It doesn't have to stay there, but you want to narrowly define the niche so it makes it real easy for the people to find you and you to find your people. A big mistake is a lot of people come up with these, podcast titles of the program that like don't tell you a thing about what the podcast is about.
Marketing jargon at its best or worst, shall we say.
Absolutely. I mean, like Larry's show was great because he called it the divorce hour. So you knew if you see that, it's all about divorce. It makes it really plain and in your face. But some people like ignore that and forget that right and left all the time. So that makes it really tough. It's also knowing like who else in your niche do you see people like to listen to or who talk about stuff. Like go and get those people on your show because that will bring more of your people to you. And just know when you know your niche and you know the language that appeals to them and you know the phrases they say and their concerns. Like if your niche is, let's say, moms who just had their first kid and don't know how to relax, right? You got a really narrowly defined niche. Then you can talk about problems with children and stuff. Whereas people who don't have kids are totally going to ignore you, which is great because you don't want them anyway, at least not when initially. So it's things like that. Again, it's always keeping your audience in mind. The audience must come first. Again, I've seen too many what was once called blabbercasts, where it's like two friends get together and they just talk to each other and they think it's interesting to other people. And like nobody would care for a second what they're talking about unless they personally knew them. So it's like you stay away from that nonsense and you always keep your audience in mind. And I like to use the anagram wait. Why am I talking? And when you keep it in mind, like, is what I'm saying interesting, relevant, informative, supportive to my audience, then you say it. And if it's not, you don't.
This is a good rule for any kind of content, folks, just in case you're wondering. Social media posts, blog posts, all that jazz.
Exactly.
Videos, whatever you want. And this is honestly one of the reasons why this show exists, because a lot of times these foundational principles, like why am I talking, are the things that people skip over, and they go into like, what's the process of setting up a podcast, or what podcast platforms do I want to be on, or how many episodes am I going to have in my first season? Like, dude, why are you talking? Right? So just start with that. And then once you have a very good understanding of why you're talking, this is something that's fun for me, because I like to look at this as can give people new perspectives. The reason I talk is to give people new perspectives. And some people are open to receiving new perspectives and some people are not. I don't control that. But the reason I talk is to create opportunities for new perspectives to arise and for people to be able to try on things that feel like that's what they would do. And so it's really not, and I always think it's also easier to get to that kind of understanding about yourself through conversation with other people, because they're having an experience of you and then they can reflect back to you what that type of experience is. But when you have that, then you can, then you have this moment, right? You have this moment where you're like, I know why I'm here and I know why I'm talking. Okay, now I can try on different ways of talking, different channels to talk, like even this is where the tactics layering of this comes in, right? Now we can layer on a podcast or a radio show or a TikTok channel or what
Mhm.
YouTube channel, right? Like there's
Or LinkedIn Live.
LinkedIn Lives. Right? There's lots of different ways to try it on, but the reason, a good reason for you to even be looking at a specific arena of tactics is because you're like, okay, I know this is what I want to do and how I want to bring ideas to the people. Okay, great. Some people are going to choose a book, right? Like some people want to just sit and write, and that feels very comfortable for them. And that's great. Some people choose a blog. Some people, like, I could keep listing them, but there's a lot of different tactics you can choose. But the point is that you can start to, I know why I'm here and why I'm saying what I'm saying. Okay, this feels like a channel that's aligned with how I would show up as a human. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. So if you're joining us late into the conversation, we talked about kind of the profile of people who might match a podcast. So go back and watch that because we have more places to go. Sam, I really wanted to talk about the concept of an ongoing conversation in a podcast, because a podcast by nature has episodes, right? And I've heard different things, and I'd love to hear your expertise too on lengths of podcasts and what is good and what is bad, or if there's not really a thing and it's more about a match to you. But what does it look like to think about, okay, now I've got this, why am I talking? But now I'm not just talking for 5 minutes. I'm talking for a series or multiple seasons worth of conversation. And one of the things I run across is people will feel like they don't have enough content for that, or they don't have enough good ideas, which I have never found to be true, but people have these self-imposed limitations on themselves. So what are some of are there tips that you have that can help people kind of build that out, or is it a mindset thing? What have you seen?
Yeah, it's totally a mindset thing. I hear that all the time, and I'm like, are you kidding me? There's so much to talk about. Things are changing in the world quicker than ever before. You bring on amazing guests. You will learn something every week. There's always something to talk about. But having the ongoing conversation and trying to figure out how to organize, I mean, that's a great question. And oftentimes I say you want to sort of break it down. Do you want to consider a year a season, a half a year, a quarter of a year? I like 12 episodes, I think, is a nice length for a season. But then you can have monthly themes. We love going by calendars. So you can take 4 episodes in a month and cover a particular theme, and especially what's relevant to what's going on at the time. So if it's the holiday season, the theme is all around holidays and how do you manage your business during the holidays, or how do you deal with family during the holidays, whatever your topic is. So you get different things around holidays, different things in the summertime, different things in the fall or the spring. February is relationship month because of Valentine's Day. So you can find sort of these themes that you can work on, and then you can have multiple shows in that theme. And then you just got to find, 3 or 4 guests who are good people who can talk about different aspects of that theme. And then next month, it's a different theme. And the following month, it's a different theme. Now, that's one way, is to follow the calendar. But there are some people who they've written a book, or they have content, or they have some kind of online course, and they have their thing. And then it's just kind of breaking it down. And it's, over what period of time are we going to break it down and sort of cover the basics? People often are afraid of I don't want to give away all my best stuff. And it's no, give away your best stuff, because that's what's going to bring people to you. And you give the best stuff and they're going to be, oh my God, this is amazing. How much more value am I going to get from actually paying and working with this person? And those people who won't pay you for your best stuff, they're not your clients anyway, because they'll never pay you for anything.
They weren't going to pay you at all, so don't even worry about it.
Exactly. A very good friend of mine said, information is free. It's accountability and support that people actually pay for. And when you keep that in mind, then you know where your real value is. You're never afraid. But I know all different people have all different kinds of strategies of coming up with topics to talk about. Like, if you know your audience really well, what are their 4 biggest pain points? And what are 3 different strategies for each of those pain points that you can help them with? So right there, you've got 12 episodes around each of those strategies.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a million and one kinds of techniques to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I often share with my clients is to get curious about what inspires you. And like, if you're out in the world, people who have watched the show will have heard me share this before, but my husband makes fun of me all of the time because I'm constantly telling him things are personal branding stories. So like my mother-in-law was watching my son on Saturday night, and they watched the Disney movie Luca, which if you haven't seen it and you have Disney Plus, you should. It's such a wonderful movie.
Yeah, it's cute. It's
But
very cute.
I watched the whole thing and I'm like, this is a personal branding movie. Like the kid is a sea monster and like he goes ashore and has this whole experience, and you're like, this whole movie is about him like learning to appreciate himself and find his people.
Right.
And I'm sure there's other people who watch the movie and interpret something differently about it. And that is like the beauty in that. It's not like you're supposed to watch this movie and interpret personal branding stuff about it. I interpret that because that's how I see the world. And when we can tap into those things, we can see it in the playground. We can see it in other drivers in traffic. We can see it in a TV ad. We can see it in our relationships. We can see it in our conversations. We can see it on social media. We can find so many places to be inspired. One, if we are cognizant of what inspires us. And 2, we put just a little bit of intention into being inspired. I tell people all the time, I have too much content, right? Like I have too many ideas on a daily basis that could be a social media post that I can't actually post that much on social media. It would be crazy and I would blow up the algorithm, right? Like the algorithm would be doing nothing for me. And so like, that's because I allow myself to be inspired by stuff. Music lyrics is one that gets me like all the time, right? Like, I'm like, oh, I never heard that in that song before. That's like really meaningful in this way. And again, it's my perspective. But then when you take that perspective and you share it with people, one, the likelihood that someone else's brain put that puzzle together exactly the same way your brain did is almost non-existent.
Right.
And 2, in the scenario where what you've said is compatible with what someone else believes, then all of a sudden it creates this like, oh, that's my people, right? Like that person gets me. We're thinking the same things. And you can't necessarily know that for sure. Like, I don't know what Sam is even thinking in this moment. I've had lots of conversations with Sam, right? But like, I can say what I believe and he can say what he believes. And then we're like, oh, these 2 things are compatible. But neither of us changed what we believed or changed what we were going to say. We just did those things and those things were compatible. So I think that's another important perspective on the creationary front.
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking how much I love your energy and what you're all about. And I'm just loving being on your show.
Oh, well, thank you. I get very passionate, especially about this topic, because I think, and I love that you talked about how like accountability and support is what people actually pay for and not the information, because I think a lot of times from a content creation perspective, people think they have to generate information, right? And we're generating information, but one of the really cool things you have, one of the cool opportunities you have with a podcast or even like a weekly LinkedIn Live, something that is recurring in nature, conversational in nature, is that you create an opportunity to be supportive in a different way. Or if I show up and do one thing one time, that's me being supportive one thing one time, right? But if I create a weekly show, I get to show up in a supportive capacity on an ongoing basis. I get to show up in the capacity of holding you accountable. And that may not be to the point where like, I'm going to have people on my show and be like, what did you do this week? But I have the opportunity to call people to action. I have the opportunity to allow people to generate ideas. And it's a really cool thing. Again, this is what brings the tactic to life are these foundations. And if you know from your perspective that you want to create a place where people can ask, for me, this is like a place where people can come and ask the marketing questions they're not getting good answers to. And they go to Chat GPT or Google, whatever, and there's just so much information now. It's like, how do I know what if this is good? What if this is helpful? Right. It's like, you don't. So what are you going to do to go find sources that will allow you to feel like you're being heard, you're being taken into consideration, and you're getting a next step, right? That's a different group of people, but that is also dictated by you. And if you decide that you want to be that person, you want to hold people accountable like that, bring it into your show, bring it into your blog, bring it into your social media post. Again, tactic irrelevant at that point. Bring it. And so if you're going to choose podcasts, and you could go through and again, ask Chat GPT how to set up a podcast. And I'm sure he would come up with a really tactical answer for you. But all of that juicy goodness about why people want to keep coming back and why people want to listen and why people want to tell their friends that they need to listen to it, it's because you're showing up doing what you believe you can do to change the world in your little corner of it. And like, heck, I think everybody should be doing that. If everybody could have a podcast, I think people would feel a lot more supportive, honestly. But this is just my perspective.
I would just say the world today needs your voice. Oh, I love New York mug.
Oh yeah, I chose this specifically for you today.
But I would
Talk Radio
like,
NYC. I love New York Cup. They just want to go there.
Being a proud native New Yorker, it's just I had to point it out.
Yeah.
But these days I say the world needs your voice. That there is so much going on right now. People are thirsty. They're looking for people who have an answer around all different kinds of topics, who are real, who understand what it's like in real life. And it's just more important than ever to just let our voice be heard. Mm-hmm. And when we let our voice be heard, the people who resonate with us will come to us, and we will create something amazing that we never even thought we could have.
I agree. Also, I'm writing down Let Your Voice Be Heard because right now it's competing for Top Insight of the Week, and you guys can check out my Saturday posts for that. Okay, friends, before we come to an end here, we're actually doing something else interesting with this episode because we are talking about a specific tactic, and there might be people who are now looking at this episode and being like, well, maybe I want to try podcasting or I want to try internet radio. So Sam and I have actually put together a workshop called Podcast Success Stories. Sam, do you want to talk about it a little bit? And then I'm going to put it in the chat after this because it's I don't want it to bungle up anything. But if you're watching this live and you're interested in that workshop, it's a free workshop, then come and check it out. The link will be there. But Sam, give us an overview of what we're going to be diving into even more deeply in that workshop.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate it. Because I've been running this network for so many years. I've worked with lots of different people who've had lots of different kinds of success. And, I just found that in talking to people about having a show in general, that it was like most people have this concept of like what it takes to have a successful show. Like I have to get 1 million listeners. I got to be #1 in Apple podcasts and all this stuff. And I just was like, no, like there's all kinds of success you can have without getting 1 million listeners. And so I kind of created this workshop to dispel some of these big myths and to take real life examples of people I've worked with and highlight what's the success that they had. And how did they go about do it? What was the strategy that worked for them? And it's 3 different case studies. I also have a bunch of statistics about the podcast industry beforehand to kind of dispel some other myths, to really support people in understanding and opening up their minds to see that there's all different ways of having success with a show. You don't have to be so limited, and it doesn't have to look just one way. And so I do a lot of Q&A at the end because people always have a lot of questions about all different kinds of things related to having a podcast. And I just want to support people and help people. So we're going to spend a lot of time with the question and answer so you can actually ask the question that you want most to know the answer to.
And fun facts, because Tracy will be at this one. So you can also bring your questions about what does it look like to create authentic content from a podcast perspective, and how do you tap into that authenticity within you to be able to bring that to the world on an ongoing basis.
And how do you integrate that into your existing marketing plan? Like, how do I take a podcast and integrate it into all the things I'm already doing?
Yes. You don't need a podcast over there that's disconnected from all of the other things that you're doing, because that's just one other thing you're going to have to do. And especially if you are a solo knowledgepreneur, the word we used earlier, you don't have that kind of time. So let's not, if you're new to me, one of the things you will learn about me is I don't believe in wasting time. I believe in being productive. And so we give ourselves enough time to do also the joyful things in our lives, watch Disney movies with our kids and go for walks and trips to the mountains and all of these good things. And so if you're spending way too much time on marketing efforts that are not connected to each other and not driving revenue or achieving what you're trying to achieve, those things don't happen. So we pull it back, we make it simple, create a strategy that like works for you. And if you've considered at all, is podcast right for me? Or you're new in your podcast journey and you've done a couple of episodes, or you've like done a lot of research on the technical stuff and you're not really like, I don't know, like I still not feeling if I have enough knowledge. Come to this workshop. You will have the knowledge you need. And if you do not have the knowledge you need, you will have the contacts to the people who have the knowledge you need in order to make those decisions. So that's going to be on July 31st, 12 Eastern. Is it 12 Eastern?
Yes, I believe so. Let me just double check. I don't want to mislead anybody, but easy to remember. It's the last day of the month. Yep, at noon Eastern time.
Noon Eastern time. So come and join us on Harry Potter's birthday at noon Eastern time. If you're my people, you get that reference. And if not, that's July 31st for everybody else. And just get into the conversation. Get into the conversation about podcasting. Try it on, right? Have some fun. It's with Tracy and Sam, so you know it's going to be fun and you know it's going to be educational. And tell your friends, right? This open invitation. Come and learn about podcasting. And this is also, from a crazy stupid marketing perspective, a test. So something that we're testing on training around specific tactics, because at the end of the day, you do need a tactic to make marketing come to life. And if people like it, then we will probably do this for some other tactics as well, folks. So you keep the feedback coming in, and we'll make sure that we're making this as impactful for you as we can. Sam, before we wrap up, and if people can't come to the workshop for whatever reason, where's the best place for people to find you?
So I'm real easy to get a hold of. My email address is Sam, my first name, at talkradio.nyc. And I'm all over social media. I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, everywhere. Just look for Sam Liebowitz and you'll find me. But go to the website, www.talkradio.nyc, to see what we're all about. And just shoot me an email and we can set up a time to chat.
Yeah, and you can listen to some of the awesome shows that are also on Talk Radio NYC. There's some really great topics. So there's some good listening to be found there as well, folks. Sam, thank you so much for sharing so many of your golden nuggets today. I'm looking forward to learning even more in the workshop. For those of you who are first timers to the show, or for those of you who are not first timers to the show, well, for those of you who are not first timers, you know what I'm going to say. But if you're new to the show, you might not know what I'm going to say. But here it is that this conversation, and any conversation that you hear on the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, is not just one 60-minute conversation that is going to give you all of the answers to all of the questions that you're ever going to have. And while other people might promise that, what I know is the real way that happens is to stay in the conversation. So if you're currently exploring podcasts or any other kind of talking media, and you want to talk it out with somebody connect with Sam, connect with me, stay in the conversation about it. It's not a one-off. It's an opportunity for you to get and stay into the conversation, but only you can choose to stay in the conversation. So if you want to choose it, we will welcome it. And with that, I've got a last minute comment from Gabriella, so I'll pull it up. She's sharing, it was really educational for an aspiring podcaster like me. Got lots of value from it. Looking forward to the podcast class on July 31st. We are super happy to see you here, Gabriella. And I'm super happy to see you always because, we're actually in Calgary together, so we can hang out. But this is your invitation, folks. Stay in the conversation. Me, Sam, Gabriella, all you other people who didn't actually get in the chat that I saw popping up on the eyeballs thing, get in the chat or ask us questions after. Also good. And stay in the conversation if it's meaningful to you. And if it's not, make the choice that it's not and own that. Also, a really good way to own your personal brand. With that, everybody, thank you. Thank you, Sam, so much. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, permission to do you.
Thank you.